Welcome to my channel. I am the out-of-body atheist, and I have taken you to what is perhaps one of the least hospitable places I could find. So I've come to this very hostile place to talk to you about the arguments from design, or the teleological arguments. The Bonneville Salt Flats are a remnant of a vast freshwater lake that dominated this landscape during the Pleistocene era. Now, all that's left is this salty clay layer, home to only extremophiles and the occasional off-roader. A human being could not survive here long term, nor could most other animal or plant life on Earth. And yet, if we compare this blasted landscape to any other world we've discovered, this area, this place, is hospitable by comparison. If these Bonneville Salt Flats were representative of the whole of the planet Earth, this would still be the most fertile world we know. The teleological argument for God is one of the most popular arguments used by creationists to attempt to prove that evolution and the Big Bang Theory cannot be true. The teleological argument goes like this: the universe is precisely fine-tuned in terms of its universal constants. If these values were even slightly different, life could not exist. An intelligent designer is proposed as the best explanation for this fine-tuning. This argument assumes, with no evidence, that the constants of our universe could have been different. For all we know, this is the only way a universe can be. And our reality is not programmable. It's not as if you can turn gravity up and down with the turn of a knob. But that is an assumption that is contained within the teleological argument for fine-tuning. Worse, this argument can't tell us anything about the supposed designer of our universe or how they went about designing our universe. Presumably, this gap is left open on purpose to shoehorn in their favorite creator god. The vast majority of our universe is incredibly hostile to life. 99.999% of the universe would kill us in moments. We can at least survive for days on the salt flats. A designed universe, by these criteria, is unfalsifiable and indistinguishable from a naturalistic universe. Douglas Adams may have addressed this argument best when he wrote, "This is rather as if you imagine a puddle waking up one morning and thinking, 'This is an interesting world I find myself in. An interesting hole I find myself in. Fits me rather neatly, doesn't it? In fact, it fits me staggeringly well. Must have been made to have me in it.' This is such a powerful idea that as the sun rises in the sky and the air heats up, and as, gradually, the puddle gets smaller and smaller, frantically hanging on to the notion that everything's going to be all right, because this world was meant to have him in it, was built to have him in it. So the moment he disappears catches him rather by surprise. I think this is something we may need to be on the watch out for. The argument from Irreducible Complexity is a variant of the teleological argument that uses biological complexity instead of fine-tuning as the basis for its argument for a designer or creator. For creationists, this one must be especially exciting because you can use it to argue both against evolution and for an intelligent designer, which you can then switch out for your favorite god. To summarize the argument, certain biological parts are complex and could not continue to function if we were to remove one or more of its components. Therefore, those complex biological components with smaller parts must have been designed. The eye is proposed as one such irreducibly complex system. Its photosensitive nerves, its lens, and its muscles are said to not have been able to develop on their own. And if you were to remove any one of them, you would not have a functional eye. Despite the claim that the eye is irreducibly complex, we have evidence that it evolved more than once independently. The human eye, with its inverted retina, and the octopus eye, with its properly arranged retina, are both examples of different evolutionary pathways that resulted in the same basic structure. So not only can an eye evolve, but we have evidence it happens again and again. Not only that, but the human eye, the eye that is supposed to be the best of all possible eyes, the literal window, one assumes, to the soul, is backwards. Our intelligent designer, if it designed the human eye, left a blind spot in ours, and yet endowed the octopus, a relative of the snail, with eyes that lack a blind spot because their evolutionary past seemingly left them with a far better design. We have living evidence on Earth with us today that eye-like systems can continue to function without some or even most of their parts. The lowly euglena, a single-celled alga, one of those, has a photosensitive organelle in its single cell that also has a structure that can block light, and it uses that simple patch of photosensitivity to move toward or away from light sources. The planaria, a flatworm, has taken it a step further, still not very far. It has a cup-shaped eye. Photosensitive cells lining a cup-shaped indentation in its body. And that cup shape allows the planaria to detect directionality of light sources a little bit more accurately. And that's it. It still gives it an evolutionary advantage. One step further on is the nautilus, another cephalopod. Those pesky cephalopods crapping all over creationism with their weird tentacle things. The nautilus has an eye that lacks a lens and a cornea, but it is an exaggerated cup shape that creates a pinhole camera and can be focused by flexing muscles. So the nautilus can get a much more accurate image of the world that it inhabits, still lacking parts of this irreducibly complex eye. And then finally, we come to the human, or the octopus eye, that has all the stuff. Honestly, I love my lensy eyes. I would not have a different eye, but you have to accept that all of these steps still confer an advantage. They're all still better than nothing. They all still do something. Thus, we have to conclude that the eye is not irreducibly complex, and I'm afraid creationists are up in the night on this one. The biological mechanisms that result in clotting blood in, well, specifically us, is proposed as an irreducibly complex system. If we removed one of the biological pathways in the clotting cascade, creationists say that it would not function. However, if we look even just within mammalia, we will note that whales lack one of these irreducibly complex proteins, and their clotting cascade still works. To make matters worse, jawless fish have only 6 of these supposedly irreducibly complex factors instead of our 10, and their blood can still clot. Behe tried to argue that the bacterial flagellum is an irreducibly complex propeller, basically, that would not function if you took away one or more of its parts, and thus the flagellum was supposed to be the nail in the coffin for evolution versus intelligent design. The basal structure of the flagellum is almost identical to the type 3 secretion system found in some bacteria. So without almost all of its other parts, just the basal section of the flagellum does something. The flagellar structure itself, the whole thing, shows a great deal of diversity across bacterial species, suggesting that it is not designed, but rather an end result of evolution via natural selection. It appears that the natural world didn't hear about Behe's hypothesis of the intelligently designed flagellum. There are many examples of flagella that are functional, just with reduced efficiency in bacterial species. The argument from irreducible complexity is just another missing link argument that feels more compelling because instead of talking about fossils, we're talking about fancy proteins. Just like the missing link arguments against evolution in the fossil record, we find that when we go deeper into these arguments from Irreducible Complexity, creationists are just shifting the goalposts like the lying liars they are. A worldview that takes into account the evidence that we have cannot include a God because there is no evidence in this vast world of ours for a God. The universe as we find it does not suggest an intelligent designer. Unless you believe in a designer with a penchant for lifeless rocks and vast stretches of vacuum. Life as we find it does not suggest a designer unless you propose an incompetent designer that half-asses everything it does. Humanity is supposed to be the pinnacle of design, but we have so many flaws. We are bipedal, and yet, over the course of our lifetimes, because this isn't ideal, this is the product of evolution, our knees give out, our hips give out, our backs slowly tear themselves apart under the strain of supporting a spine that evolved for quadrupeds while we stand on two legs. If we were intelligently designed, a modern engineer could come up with something better than the human spine, something that would last a lifetime. But what we have is what we have. And if it is the result of design, I have some notes. Teeth don't last 80 years, but we live 80 years. Our adult teeth are probably going to be lost, and most of Mammalia has this problem with the exception of rodents, the lucky bastards. When a mammal has lost its teeth, it is doomed to a future of starvation because it can't eat anymore. That is a design flaw. We have essential components that do not last our entire lives. And that appears to just be the way they are. Evolution explains that because once we've had our kids, our survival isn't important anymore. But a designer, if towards the end of the design life of a product, you've got a bunch of stuff that's not working anymore, we call that shitty design. Hardly the kind of designer that I would worship, let alone look up to. Rather than beginning with a conclusion taken from a 2,000-year-old book written before we figured out the scientific method, it is better to embrace the world as we find it and explore it without presuppositions. What does the universe tell us about itself? What sort of purposes and communities can humanity find for ourselves? What sort of future could we build for ourselves? I think you will find that a worldview built on evidence is much more hopeful and fulfilling and creates a future that is much more promising than the one offered to us by everyone's favorite death cults. I've been the out-of-body atheist. Don't let anyone tell you why you're here. Make your own meaning. And while you're out there, make some good trouble.